Had my first regional of the season, and it was a different kind of experience. Hey guys, Otaku here, back with another Yu-Gi-Oh video, and I just recently went to my first remote regional as of this last weekend. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a very different experience from playing people face-to-face or even on Dueling Book or Master Duel. In some weird way, it was kind of like a weird hybrid where I was playing with real cards, it's just the person I was playing against wasn't really there. For those who may not know what a remote duel is, it is essentially you're playing with real cards in front of your computer with a webcam facing down at your board. And I am going to be talking about my games and my rounds, how things went, but I am just going to go ahead and spoil it that no, I did not get my invite, I didn't even top, I dropped after round 5. However, even though I did end up dropping, I'm thankful that I took the time to kind of gain this experience on remote dueling because it is, for the most part, kind of a different format. And when I say that, it still has the same forbidden and limited list as the TCG with a few extra cards banned that would make the not in-person dueling a little more complicated, but it does require some things that you need to kind of do so that way you don't get cheated by opponents that are just doing remote duels to sleaze their way into an invite. And yes, those people do exist. But before we do jump on in, I have again noticed that a lot of you that watch my videos are not already subscribed to the channel, and if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos or just watching a bad player progressively become better, consider subscribing to the channel, supporting the channel, so I can continue to make videos like this one. So before we actually jump into the games, I want to talk about some of the things that my friends were kind of telling me to prepare for going into a remote duel, so that way I wasn't cheated out of a victory that I quite simply should have had. I do want to talk about some of these things, so that way in case you are a person that hasn't done a remote duel or you're getting cheated out of victories because people are sharking you, hopefully maybe you can learn from this video and also integrate these little tricks to improve your remote dueling. The big thing that my buddy Kyle was kind of on about was that you really need to kind of go into this with the idea of how you're going to want your opponents to cut the deck. Since you are not there in person, you can't physically cut the deck and make sure your opponent is not cheating by any way, shape, or form, so you really have to make sure that you know how you want them to cut to hopefully avoid them stacking the deck. I say this because, especially even in live duels, people are able to kind of figure out where the majority of human beings cut the deck, so they can usually set cards into like the center of the deck so that way it gets cut in their favor. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. So with that being said, what I was doing and what my buddy Kyle recommended I do was have my opponent cut the deck into thirds, and then once they restacked the deck from those 3 pieces, they put the top 5 cards on the top of the deck onto the bottom. The next thing is to have a playmat that has zones on it. I found out this wasn't required. I was told it was required by my friends, but I found out from a judge it's not required. However, having the zones does kind of prevent any sort of confusion from zone placement because you do have to establish which one is zone 1 and which one is zone 5. And if you don't pre-establish that and you don't have the zones to really clarify that, it makes things confusing, causes judge calls, causes time to be killed for no reason. It's a headache. Next thing I want to talk about, and this is technically one of the rules to a remote duel, is really just complete communication. And what I really mean by that is just communicate every tiny little thing you're doing. This can range from just announcing the phases you're going to, which you should already be doing that even in live duels, to something as simple as what type of summoning you're doing. An example that my buddy Kyle gave me is that your opponent could end up taking 2 of their monsters on the field and putting them in the graveyard, not really clarifying what they're doing, but they pick up their extra deck. And in this example, the player is a Snake Eye player with like Snake Eye Ash and a random body on board. They take the 2 bodies, put them in the graveyard, reach for the extra deck, and instead of going into the extra deck, they just announce Snake Eye Ash effect. So the problem here is that the opponent most likely had the intention of going into the extra deck and decided they wanted to go for the Flame Burge or Snake Eye Oak, whatever, instead of going into the extra deck at that exact moment. Requiring your opponent, but also practicing it yourself on communicating your exact movements before it gets done is very vital. My buddy Kyle was even recommending put the extra deck monster on the board before you put the bodies in the graveyard, which is also not a terrible idea. This realistically just finalizes any play you're going to make before it actually is made, so that way you can't be sharked and, you can't shark your opponent. And that's really it I have for the tips. There's probably some other things I'm just kind of forgetting about or they weren't super important, but let's go ahead and jump on into the games. So to start, I was playing the Gimmick Puppet Horus FTK deck. I figured it was like a really easy deck to kind of navigate through a remote duel because I do know that like super combo heavy decks can kind of be really complicated to navigate through a duel that your opponent's not actually there. I remember during tier limit format, people were heavily complaining about remote duels, but at the same time, tier limit mirrors were pretty annoying enough as they were in random in-person duels. So yeah, I was playing the Gimmick Puppet FTK with the Horus engine because this is a deck I really wanted to play to begin with, and Having played it, I don't know if I will be playing it for the rest of the format because it is incredibly frail. I'm not going to show a deck list because if you just want to see a deck list, go ahead and look at the deck list on either my video that I recently posted about the NAWCQ toppings, or just look at the list yourself on YGO Pro Deck. My deck profile was pretty much a carbon copy. The only difference was the side deck. I did not own copies of Spooky Dogwood, and funny enough, Spooky Dogwood may have come in handy in one of these duels. So navigating the Gimmick Puppet FTK, I, in game 1, end up winning the die roll. I'm not going to reveal what I was going against just yet because in game 1, I didn't know what I was going against. I proceeded to normal summon Gimmick Puppet Little Soldiers, and my opponent just said game 2. For the record, I have not fully learned the FTK and all the lines in case you do end up getting interrupted, so there's a chance I could have botched it. I do, of course, know the two primary lines, but there are times that I just mess up, which, again, we will talk about in a later game, that, again, I could have fucked it up there, and he could have won. So he proceeds to scoop it up and go game 2. Of course, he chooses to go first, and wouldn't you know it, I'm going against Fiendsmith Yubel. He proceeds to combo off, go sicko mode. Meanwhile, I'm looking at my hand. And I primarily sided for going second, and I immediately see the Lightning Storm. My opponent combos off. I, of course, have no interruptions because the build I am playing only plays one of each hand trap, specifically for crossout. And I sided all these out because Yubel is not known for playing non-engine because they can't really fit it. My opponent doesn't set up the craziest event boards. He did not have Escape of the Unchained, and he did have Soul of Rage on the board, not in the graveyard with the Yama, so some things kind of got muddied up, but for the most part, he has a pretty standard Yubel board. He's sitting on the Xyz that can negate and pop. He has 2 Phantom of Yubels on the board, and he proceeds to have plenty of other stuff. I top deck an Imperm, immediately go to Imperm the Xyz monster, because either he uses the negate and pops a card, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him, or he just lets it through and, he doesn't have a negate. Oh darn. He lets it through, and I immediately notice that for some reason, he put all his monsters in attack position. So I immediately fire off the Lightning Storm and nuke the board. Of course, I do know that the Yubel monsters have the ability to float, and also the Nightmare Throne is on board, so the board isn't completely dead. But after nuking the board, he proceeds to summon a Yubel and a Spirit of Yubel in attack mode. This is going to be important. So I do realize that I can kind of just win from this point. I end up summoning the Gimmick Puppet of Dark Strings without nuking the board again, because I did not quite have the cards I needed to do any sort of FTK. So I have Gimmick Puppet of Dark Strings, the field spell, and I have Giant Hunter on board. Giant Hunter was used to pop the Nightmare Pain in the back row, so that way I wasn't going to be hitting myself, and I had a game plan here. I proceed to the battle phase. My opponent's only at 5k because I burned him. I hit him with a Giant Grinder, which is what the Giant Hunter became later on. So I proceed to battle, and I attack into Phantom Yubel. My opponent goes, okay, I take no battle damage, and he's not destroyed. And I proceed to activate from my hand Forbidden Droplet. I send 2 monsters to the graveyard. One is the Chimera Doll on my board, and I send a Cattle Scream from my hand to negate both of the Yubels, and then I proceed to attack both of the Spirit Yubel and the regular Yubel, and of course my opponent takes 6k damage here, losing the duel. So for the first round, I 2-0 Yubel Fiendsmith. Doing pretty good so far, and I didn't even FTK. Second round, I go second. My opponent wins the die roll, and wouldn't you know it, Snake Eye Fiendsmith. Yay. My opponent sets up a pretty okay board. It was pretty obvious that my opponent hasn't had a whole lot of time to play his deck. He did not know the lines. In my head, I was sitting there okay, now he does this, now he does this, and he would go a complete different turn. He would zig when I thought he was going to zag. It was very interesting. His first end board was pretty okay. I won't say it was terrible. It was okay. He had Temple on board. He had Flameburge on board. He had IP and Hida in the back row. He had Nightmare Phoenix with an Appaloosa, and he had Promethean Engrave. I do thankfully open the Condolence Puppet, and since he has 2 monsters summoned from the extra deck on the board, I activate it to dump 3. He, of course, lets it through. He doesn't have an Ash. So I dump the Bisque Doll, the Terror Baby, and a Rouge Doll. I activate Rouge Doll when it hits the graveyard, which, by the way, I have a Rouge Doll in hand. I'm kind of trying to bait the Appo. And, of course, he negates it. I have then, of course, activate the Terror Baby in the graveyard, and he negates that, leaving Appaloosa with no more counters. I then go the Bisque Doll, so he can no longer target my Gimmick Puppets this turn. Obviously, he has no response to this, but he does use Flame Burst to summon the IP to his board. I then activate the King Sarcophagus in my hand, and immediately he's threatened, as he should be. So he activates the IP to go into the SP Little Knight, banish the King Sarcophagus. And from here, it's pretty much history. I activate the Mansion field spell from my hand, and from there, I'm unaffected from non-Xyz monsters, and I am also untargetable thanks to the Bisque Doll, so I don't quite FTK because my hand doesn't allow it, but I don't need to FTK. It's turn 2. I can OTK. I summon out the Gimmick Puppet of Dark Strings to nuke the board. Obviously, SP Little Knight survives because of the IP effect, but at this point, I have like 12k damage on board to just kind of battle, so I OTK him. Game 2, again, I side for going second, and it was well paid off. I went second again for game 2, and my opponent, again, sets up a pretty okay board. This board was actually a lot better. He had High Wave King Caesar on board, so I was affected by something, even if I had the field spell on board, but he also had Temple, he had Promethean Engrave, he had IP in the foreground, he had a 2-stack Appaloosa, and he had a Nightmare Phoenix again with Flame Burst on board. Now, what is key here is he had a full back row. He had the Poplar in the back row, he had the Snake Eye Diabella Star in the back row, and then he had 3 set cards. Immediately, I'm thinking like at least one of these set cards is Imperm, but that's fine because my opening hand consisted of Raigeki and Harpy's Feather Duster. I proceed to just lead with the Harpy's Feather Duster, nuking the back row, and sure enough, 2 of those sets was Skill Drain. Wow, if I didn't open Duster, I would have been cooked game 2. I then proceed to activate the Raigeki, nuking the front of the board. However, he chains IP to make SP, so that way he has SP still available to him and not be like destroyed because of IP's effect. But the Appaloosa was also made with IP on his turn, which means it could not be destroyed by card effect either. He then, of course, goes Flame Burst to summon Ash and Poplar. Ash and Poplar add shit to his hand, whatever. So my main concern at this point is 2-stack Appo, SP, and then the Promethean is still engraved. From here, though, I pretty much have it. I OTK him again. I summon out a slew of Gimmick Puppets in a certain order, so I was able to nuke his board, but also just kind of go for the OTK, and that's really it. There was not much more left for that. So for the first 2 rounds, I 2-0 both Fiendsmith Yubel and Fiendsmith Snake Eye. We're doing pretty good. It's all downhill from here. Round 3, I'm up against Centurion, and he loses the die roll. I go first, I FTK. Game 2, he goes first, and he proceeds to Calamity Lock me. We're pretty much both playing the same game. We're just both playing like really shitty solitaire. Game 3, I go first, and I don't FTK. Yeah, things went horribly wrong here. One thing I should have done when deck building is acknowledge that the Gimmick Puppets just die to Shifter. And sure enough, I saw Shifter in his Prosperity Mills on the game 2, and unfortunately I wasn't siding Shifter. I don't have Shifter in the side deck, but I opened the Crossout Designator, which means if I had Shifter, I would have been okay. Sure enough, in draw phase, he activates Shifter. I look at my hand, I have 2 Mcetis, 2 Little Soldiers, and a Crossout Designator. I set the Crossout Designator, and I set a Little Soldiers, and just hope there's a way I survive. There was no way I survived, because this man was going off. He normal summons Tempai Dragon Hydra. Y'all remember when I went to the Greenville Regional and I talked about how my buddy Tyler was playing a Tempai Dragon with a Centurion smokescreen? This guy was doing it in the complete reverse. He was playing Centurion with a Tempai smokescreen. For those who don't know what a smokescreen is, essentially where you play one deck and then your side deck, you have a completely different core that can kind of run with the same non-engine that you are playing. And this works out really well because what my buddy was doing with Tempai and the smokescreen of Centurion was he was going Tempai to OTK, going second. Your opponent makes you go first, and then you Calamity Lock for game 2. This guy was Calamity Locking, and then when I choose to go first, he OTKs me with Tempai. The problem here is that if I successfully FTK'd him, this wouldn't have worked. The problem here is that Shifter fucks my deck. So yeah, he OTKs me. I lose round 3. That's my fault. I should have prepared with Shifter in the side for Crossout Designator because it does just kill the deck. Shifter is a menace in not only this format, but 90% of formats because most decks do need their graveyard in some way, shape, or form. and I'm pretty tired of Shifter. You will never stop hearing me say ban Shifter. Round 4, we go up against Runic Whitewoods. I'm going to continue to call it Whitewoods because that sounds better than White Forest. It doesn't ring nearly as well as White Forest, but that's just me. This was the matchup that I kind of realized that Gimmick Puppets really hurt against Runic specifically, especially if they're going second. If they're going first, they FTK because Runic doesn't run any non-engine. They can't afford to. The problem here is that I once again lose the die roll. He sets up a pretty good board, and I just proceed to not be able to play through it. Game 2, I fail the FTK. I fucked this up horribly. So I opened both the Argent Chaos Forces, which means the Machinix cannot search it, plus give me my normal summon. So I don't have a legal search off of him, and I don't get my extra normal summon because of it. Not the worst thing in the world. I still had FTK with that in mind if I didn't fuck up another key factor, which was that later in the combo, I activated the Dark Strings to nuke the board, and I was supposed to do Chain 2 with the Machinix Engrave to add the Argent back to hand and special him. I didn't do that. So here I am with a Dark Strings on board and nothing really else, and my opponent is looking at me like, can you kill me here? And I really wanted to say yes, but that wouldn't have been true. I had a Terror Baby in hand, so if I had that extra normal summon, yeah, I still would have had it for sure. But again, I didn't have a search off the Machinix when it was on the board, so I didn't have the extra normal summon. And so my opponent has 1,400 life points left, and I just pass. And yeah, he kills me from there. I fucked it up so bad that I lost game 2. I don't know if I would have had it game 3 because he would have been able to go first, meaning that he would have been able to set up a board that would be hard to break. The Gimmick Puppets aren't affected by monster effects when the field spell is on board, and Runic is primarily spell effects, so yeah, I'd be safe from his White Forest cards, but his Runic cards, you know, he just activates Destruction, nuke the field spell, then I'm gonna get affected again. He activates Flashing Fire or Freezing Curses, I'm still affected, so Runic's a pretty bad matchup for Gimmick Puppets when they're going second. But nevertheless, I unfortunately botched it. I obviously can acknowledge where I messed up here. This was fully within my control to win game 2. Game 3 is up in the air on whether it would have been, you know, playable, depending on, of course, what I opened on my side deck. So we're X2. I pretty much decided that if I lose again, I'm gonna drop. There's no point in continuing simply because it was only top 16 with this regional. I did expect remote regionals to be kind of smaller, more restrictive because of this. So top 16, and I think X2 was kind of pushing it for top 16 on invite. So I was like, I'll play it out. If I lose again, I'll drop. Unfortunately, round 5, I drop. Round 5, I am once again up against the Fiendsmith U-Bell, and it did not go nearly as well this time. Game 1, he sets up a very good board. He has 2 Phantom of U-Bells. He has Nightmare Pain on board. He has the Nightmare Throne on board. He has the Xyz monster. He even has Caesar on board, so I'm affected by 2 different monsters even if I have the field spell. The problem here is that I pretty much can acknowledge that even if I could get around the Caesar, I wasn't getting around the Phantom of U-Bell. Phantom of U-Bell's effect is that when a monster activates its effect, it can change its effect to destroy 1 U-Bell monster. And we have all seen that ruling with Tempai, that even if the field spell's up, the Tempai monsters can get their effects changed because it's not affecting the monster somehow. And that still applies to Gimmick Puppets when Mansion is on board. So I, without giving my opponent any knowledge of what I am playing, choose to just go game 2. Game 2, I don't FTK, and this time it wasn't fully in my control. I was missing like 1 key piece to really pull it off, and that key piece was having another level 8 to be able to summon. I was just missing exactly what I needed. I also opened the Cattle Scream, which had no way of getting it out of my hand at the time. So it does happen from time to time. I think there may have been a way I could have improved it. Maybe with the Chimera Doll, I add Bisque Doll to hand, and then use Bisque Doll to drop the Cattle Scream out of my hand. Yeah, that probably would have worked. But regardless, I don't FTK here. However, I do end on the field spell, the Chaos Machinix, the Dark Strings, and the Trap card with an Imperm and a Droplet set. Needless to say, despite how hard he tries, he eventually realizes he can't break the board, because even though he exhausts my back row and he's under Droll, he can't get over my Xyz monsters because of the field spell. We go game 3, 10 minutes on the clock, and I know that if it gets to me, I can still win it because Gimmick Puppets can burn in the main phase. The problem here is that this man all of a sudden forgot his combos. Don't know what that was about, but all of a sudden he was playing a lot slower. Sure enough, he ends up getting Beatrice on board, and I feel like just to rub salt in the wound, he detaches the Fiendsmith first to dump something. It's not really relevant what he dumps. So he still has Lacrima attached, and then he keeps like teasing that he's going to link away the Beatrice, and he just doesn't. And I was getting a little annoyed because I knew where this was going. I called a judge for slow play. They didn't say shit. They gave him a warning, and they didn't give me a time extension, which was fucking weird, might I add. I feel like if you're gonna give him a warning, then you have to give like a time extension. But I don't know. I'm not a Konami judge. But yeah, there was like 4 minutes on the clock by that point, and we didn't get a time extension, which was crazy. So we proceed with the duel, and literally as they call time, he links away the Beatrice and burns me for 12 with the Lacrima. I'm not mad that I lost. I'm really not mad. I'm mad in the manner in which I lost that game. I felt like the chance of victory was being dangled over my head, essentially, because again, if it got to me, I could have won because due to time rules, and I don't lose until I end my main phase. But the problem is that he started playing significantly slower, and even after a warning, we were not given a time extension. Not that it would have mattered, because he probably would have just burned the time extension. It is what it is, though. I do acknowledge where I could have played better in some of these games. But I, again, am thankful for the experience that this gave me with remote dueling, because I do want to do it again. It was fairly fun, minus the slow playing, but it was just annoying on the U-Bell specifically. But also, that being said, I am pretty just on this format. My goal for this regional was to kind of try and get my invite, hopefully get my invite, and then just fuck around for the rest of the format with just like dog shit decks, because I'm pretty tapped out on this format until the ban list in August that will hopefully actually affect something. But I'm also doubtful because Konami obviously is going to probably want Snake Eye to make it to Worlds. I'm not letting this regional really affect me. One, because it was my first regional of the season, so it was just kind of and it was also, in my opinion, the worst format Yu-Gi-Oh's had in a very long time. Kashtira is nothing compared to this. And I also was playing a deck that I'm very familiar on how to play at this point, but it has its weaknesses. A Gimmick Puppet's very frail. Your opponent activates Droll or Shifter, and you have no way to out the Droll or the Shifter. You pretty much just have to scoop. The difference is the deck can play around Droll, set up a board that is harder to break, even under Droll. You're just not getting the FTK off. Shifter shuts the deck off entirely. That being said, even though Shifter and Droll also hurt Chimera, I think I'm just going to start playing Chimera Fiendsmith this format. It's a deck that I am very fluent on how to play, and in the sense, it's like either see the Droll or I'm going to kill you. But that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching and listening to me rant about a remote regional. If you're not already and you enjoy competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content, consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like on this video, and commenting down below your thoughts on today's video, or just really anything about the current format. But with that, I'll see you all in the next video. See ya!